Thanks for joining me for the session Implementing a Responsible AI Strategy. My name is Sammy Deprez. I'm managing partner of Arinti, which is a consultancy firm based in Belgium, and I'm also a board member of the Global AI community. Now, implementing a responsible AI strategy, you might also think, why do we need to do that? Well, in the next keynote session by Tim, he will talk more about also ethical, so I would listen there and you will for sure get to know more about it, but I'll already tell you a bit about it. Now, what do we want to accomplish with responsible AI? Now, responsible AI is somehow an umbrella term for different kinds of phrases like ethical AI, trustworthy AI, and so on. Now, within responsible AI, you have different kinds of activities that you need to look into. Trust, fairness, explainability, accountability, and compliance. Now, what many organizations forget is that value is, of course, very important. And responsible AI is actually figuring out the balance between value and all the rest. Because you want to build something very responsible, but at the end, what you're building still needs to bring in some value. Now, in this short session, we're going to look into two different issues that are there. The first one is responsible AI has different dimensions that we need to look into. And the second one is what kind of key practices are there already. So let's have a look first at the dimensions. Many organizations think, but I have a data scientist, he will do everything for me concerning responsible AI. Well, then the question will be, is that actually even possible? And we will see why that is not always, well, it's not even possible. Not always, but always. We need to look into 4 different kinds of dimensions to see if we are building something responsible. I will start with the first one, organizational. As I said before, responsible AI is finding the balance between value and trust. And the problem is that with AI, it's probabilistic. We're going to calculate probabilities for certain classifications, for example. And that's something that people are not always used to, because classic software development is fixed rules, and you can perfectly explain why something happens. So it's very important to be able to mitigate the risk of what you're actually doing and being able to transparent of what is happening within your machine learning models. And one important part of that is, of course, reskilling. Reskilling and being able to your employees to make sure that they understand, or your citizens to understand what AI actually does, so they can trust it. An example that I like to use is the weather forecast. And let's say in the 40s, 50s, I have no idea specifically when they start with weather forecasting, might be earlier. It was also very new. And people might not have immediately trusted it, but over time they started trusting it, although we are still sometimes like, the sun was going to shine, but at the end, people start to get used to it and they understand how it's done. And that's the same with AI. People need to understand how it's done so they can also trust into the system. A second one is customer or citizen. Again, we have the part about ethics, fairness. And an important part there of customer and citizen is who is actually your customer. Let's say you are a software vendor and you're building a solution for the police department that does, let's say, just facial recognition. Now, you as a customer vendor, you created that facial recognition system, but who is actually the consumer of those AI models? Who do you need to ask the questions to? Is this okay that we do this with your face? No, it's not the police department, but it's actually you and I where the police is using it on. So these are all things that need to be kept in mind. Or more ethically wise, let's take an API that can recognize if there's a wedding on a picture. Now, if you look into just Western weddings, well, most of the time it's black and white weddings, right? But if you would look more to Asian weddings, it will be very colorful weddings. So if you wouldn't be able to use that data also in the data set, it might recognize, for example, an Indian wedding as just a party, which might be offensive sometimes. Now, what about society? National values, for example, but also regulation. certain countries have less stricter privacy laws than, for here example, in Europe. If we build machine learning models in the less stricter countries, which might be fine and might work very well, can we just use that model and start using it here in Europe, for example? It's things, again, we need to think about while building our machine learning models. Sustainability, well, you can't open any tech paper or you're seeing ChatGPT or DALL-E or anything else. These are enormous, big models and takes a lot of energy to train. Did you know by just asking Siri to switch off the lights that it takes 30 grams of CO2? So it's actually better to keep your lights on for half an hour. So it's all things we need to keep in mind, again, while building AI solutions. And another one is, of course, workspace. Many people are afraid that AI will take over their jobs. But therefore, again, that's with many different revolutions that we've been seeing. Some people might lose their job, but new jobs are going to be created. There's a quote I read on LinkedIn, and I found it so interesting, is that AI is not going to take over your job. It's the person who's using AI who's going to take over your job. So it's up to you as government or as employer that you reskill your people, that they make sure of using those technology, and that you also allow it so they can only enhance their own skills. Now, another one is, of course, choose wisely. We see here on the left side 3 different data sets that are used. We have, for example, activity monitoring. And if it's used to us for just making our life safer, well, we'll be perfectly fine with it. But if it's used to predict if I'm going to quit, and it might be exactly the same data, we might not like that anymore. Personal life details, if it's for Facebook to recommend, you might like this group, this will fit depending on what you're liking, that's all fine. But maybe not so fine if it selects work opportunities for me automatically. Work metrics, if it's used to determine my pay, again, you might not always like that. But if it's providing me with performance feedback in an automatic way, so I know what I can get better on, well, perfectly, please do. That brings us to a second item of our issues, and that's key practices. Here I just want to bring, it's 5 different steps on what things we can look into to build a responsible AI solution. And the first one is concerning respecting privacy. And we're looking into 3 different ways. And differential privacy, for example, is being able to take, let's say, data from bol.com and group specific users together in smaller groups. So you don't individualize people to build machine learning models on it, but as a group. That way, it's not personalized to them specifically. Homomorphic encryption is something that is used in the healthcare industry and is data that is encrypted, but it can still do calculations on it. So as a data scientist or as an engineer, you will have a value X and Y, and then you will be able to get a specific value out of it, but you don't know personally what X and Y is. And then we have synthetic data. Well, we've already heard about generative AI. Well, that also exists just for generating data based on specific features. How do I want to have my data look like? That way we're, again, totally not making use of personal information, but it's fully synthetic. Then the second one, detecting and mitigating bias. And to explain you bias, let's say we're building a machine learning model for predicting if someone can become a doctor or not. Now, if we would do that on data from the 60s, well, the chance for a man to become a doctor would be way higher than for a woman, which would be an incorrect prediction, right? And these days, we don't want that anymore. Everyone needs to have the same chances, and these are things that we can't look into. But that brings us also to other parts. Diversity, that's not only in our data. We need to have, for example, data from different kinds of races, specifically and for sure also in medical data, but also in our team, because we all are grown up with a specific mindset. And that is something we will also put in our solutions if we don't discuss it with other people. So by having a diverse team of building these kinds of solutions, we will also make sure that these things are built into our solutions. Explainability, well, there's a famous credit card company that actually started with making use of AI to say, okay, this person, by entering some details, this person can get this amount of credit and other persons can get that amount of credit. And the problem was that a man and a woman who were actually earning the same thing, same details, only difference was sex. Whereas the man was getting more than the woman. Yeah, that's not good, of course. But then when they were asking the bank couldn't give an answer on it why that was the case. Because their models were not explainable. Again, these are specific, particular things that really need to look into when AI makes a difference to someone's life. And loans can make a difference to someone's life. And then we have validation. Every time you make a prediction, make sure you keep the track of it so you can also validate it afterwards. But that also brings us to another point I will discuss in a second. Now, to be able to detect the bias, for example, there are tools like fairness frameworks. You just see here a couple of open source items. I'll be talking about responsible AI dashboard and the session this afternoon. But also keeping track of documentation. Model cards, for example, that you can make open and public to everyone. What does my model do? Why did I build it for? Who funded it? But the same for data. How did we collect the data? Also, who funded the data? Because if it's, for example, for electricity, well, green energy and it's an oil company, then how correct is the data sometimes? But then we'll bring us, of course, to explainability. Let's say we're building a model that can help doctors understand what a patient has, what disease he has, based on what he has been saying. You can't just say, okay, it's this disease, but it's very important to explain why did you pick it's that disease. Pick out specific items and give scores to it. The same on a picture. The AI model might say, okay, this is a dog with a guitar. Okay, why do you recognize it's a dog and a guitar? Pick out those particular items. And then we have AI Model Validator. We all might know white hat hackers who try to penetrate your local infrastructure or even your cloud infrastructure to see if there's any leaks possible of anything that you've been building. Now we can do exactly the same on machine learning models with AI validators. They're going to try to see if the model is actually giving out what it needs to be, but also see if there's no private information that can be picked out of your model by doing specific queries. And with that, I open the floor for 2 minutes of questions, so shoot. All right, thank you very much for your attendance, and I'll give the floor to the next speaker.